Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting to 5 players that I think it's time to panic about heading into the rest of the fantasy season. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you hit that like button for me. Subscribe to the channel as well. I've got running backs and wide receivers to talk about, some very fantasy relevant players that you probably drafted relatively high that we do need to talk about, whether it's injuries to one of their teammates or their production so far this season, and ultimately what you should do with them. Let's get into it. First guy I want to talk about, a player I've been really high on heading into this season, and I am starting to panic, is James Cook. He's the running back 17 in fantasy football, half PPR formats right now, so definitely not having a bad season, but the usage here, the snap share, is something that we need to talk about, break down, and ultimately try to figure out what we should be doing. So for Cook, in the first 5 weeks of the season, he was playing about 60% of snaps a game. The only game that didn't happen was in that week 4 blowout over Miami. So, hey, you could be saying to yourself, well, in a blowout, they might not need their number one guy as often as they have throughout the season. But there is things that we didn't expect this year. I expected him to play around that 60% snap share. You know, I expected him to be a guy that would be involved in the between the 20s, be involved in the receiving game. What I didn't think was going to be the case was him to score, touchdowns, getting inside the 5 opportunities. I thought that was why they brought in Damian Harris for this season, and that has been the case so far. He's had just 3 inside the 5 carries on the year, while guys like Damian Harris and Latavius Murray have had more. The problem is Latavius Murray's expanded role in this offense that I am surprised to see, because I think Cook has been pretty solid this season in terms of his efficiency, in terms of his explosiveness, in terms of his playmaking after the catch and in the receiving game. But Murray's role is expanding. In a competitive game script we saw last week against the Giants, he split even his routes run with Murray 15-15, which I was really surprised by. I don't really know why Murray's getting more involved in the receiving game in specific. So that's very concerning. And then the report of Leonard Fournette coming for a tryout, that isn't the case. That was not actual real news. Tom Pelissero told us that report was not true and that he was not meeting with the Bills today. But when I look at the outlook I had for him this season was his usage in the receiving game. He was going to see 50-plus receptions this season, and that was going to be a huge reason why I thought he would explode in fantasy football this year. But the target share to the running backs for the team has dropped pretty significantly compared to last season. So last season, the running back target share was 19.1%. Pretty solid. Actually, very good amongst the rest of the league. Now this season, it's down almost 5% to 14.6%. And Cook now is on pace for 48 targets on the year. That's not receptions, that's targets. He's on pace for about 40 receptions on the season, when my expectation, again, was 50-plus. So we're not getting the receiving work I thought we would get, and we're, of course, not getting those touchdown opportunities that I pretty much expected him to get. And Cook has been super efficient this season with his opportunities, which is great, and made him that RB17 that he is on the year. The problem is that it just seems like the Bills don't trust him enough to be able to utilize him as that full-bore number one guy for this team. So what I want to be able to do here, as the fantasy performance hasn't been terrible, it's still been serviceable for people who haven't been paying attention to him, might still think of this as a piece of the puzzle of a really, really terrific offense. So I'm looking to get players that I think can do what I expected Cook to do this season. Those types of players, Aaron Jones might not get the 50 receptions on the year, but he could certainly do it on a per game average. Alvin Kamara is on pace to do so. Joe Mixon is that all-encompassing back as well that I think right now, even with his struggles, is looking to be more valuable when you consider what his workload is like. So there's some players that I would probably look to target if you do have James Cook, maybe build out a package that includes Cook to get one of these guys. But man, I'm just this isn't what I expected from James Cook, and I don't think he's playing poorly in this situation. It's just the team doesn't seem to trust him. Now we got to talk about one of the best players in fantasy football from last season that isn't quite looking like that this season. It's Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's the RB15 in half PPR formats right now. And the numbers, advanced stats, your regular your cookie cutter stats look terrible. He's 40th in broken tackle rate. He's not able to create yards after contact. He's 57th in that category. He's getting hit the line of scrimmage and gaining negative yardage or 0 yards very often. He's 56th in the NFL amongst running backs with at least 20 carries in stuff rate. 2.9 yards per attempt, a 1.2% breakaway run rate. He has just one carry of 15-plus yards on the year. The one thing that is saving Josh Jacobs' season right now, the reason why he's the RB15 on the year is receiving volume. It has been crazy high. He's on pace for 71 receptions this season. Can that continue? I'm not so sure. We have Michael Mayer breaking out in this offense. Big season so far from Jacoby Myers. Devontae Adams coming off a down week, but is still a target hog in this offense. But man, 22 touches per game for Josh Jacobs, despite his significant struggles. What gives me even more concern for Jacobs is his lack of efficiency against pretty bad rushing defenses. The Broncos, Steelers, Chargers, and Packers are those 4 opponents I'm talking about, all bottom 10 in opponent EPA per rush. That's 4 of the 6 games Jacobs has played has been what many other running backs would consider to be plus matchups. And Jacobs has been sorely inefficient, especially the last 2 weeks against the Patriots and against the Packers. The Packers are a team that I definitely expect him to have a big game against, and he did not, but they're still giving him the football. Then I look at the rest of the season, the schedule here. Only 3 of the final 10 games this year are against teams that are bottom 10 in EPA against the run. So that means that we're not going to see a lot of opportunities for Jacobs to have soft defenses against the run. And even so, like I mentioned, he hasn't been able to perform. And again, the thought goes back to, running backs that win rushing titles have not had good seasons the following couple of years. Look at Jonathan Taylor, obviously, 2022 to 2023 fall off, and then Derrick Henry getting hurt in 2021 after winning the rushing title in 2020. Jacobs is following a similar path here. The one thing that gives me pause in terms of like selling, I don't think this is a sell low spot because he has had 2 solid fantasy performances thanks to his receiving work. But the thing is here is obviously the fact that we're looking at a player that just tread on the tires is got to be the name of the game. And I know the one thing that saves him as well is just the fact that, we're not seeing Zamir White. We're not seeing an Amir Abdullah taking too much away from him. So the volume should continue. I just don't expect him to be able to do much with that volume right now. And there could be a lot of people interested in that volume and play off of that volume, even though the efficiency and the production from it might not be very good. Let's talk about Calvin Ridley, the wide receiver 25 on the season. Expectations for Ridley heading into the year were one of which he kind of could take this offense to another level, could be a little bit more explosive. And Ridley being a player we haven't seen for quite some time, there was a lot of uncertainty that I think people wanted to dive in and take a chance on. But the reality of the situation here in Jacksonville is just the competition for targets and production is proving to be too much for Ridley. The targets are dispersed very evenly in this offense. Christian Kirk leads with 46, Evan Ingram has 42, and then Calvin Ridley's right in the middle here with 43. So Ridley's not dominating the target share, and he trails both Kirk and Ingram in receptions this season. Ridley is that downfield option. He's averaging 13.3 yards in average depth of target. That's tied with Zay Jones, but you look at Trevor Lawrence and the way he's doling out the football this season and the way that he's getting this offense down the field, it's not off of a lot of explosive passing plays. Just 10.5% of his targets or pass attempts right now are of 20-plus air yards. That ranks 20th in the NFL. His 22 deep pass attempts on the season is 15th, so he's not doing these things at an elite level. And for Ridley, there's nothing here to point to and go, hey, this is where he's dominating in this offense in terms of his role, or hey, this is where he's dominating, compared to the rest of the NFL. Talk about targets like we did earlier. Kirk, Ingram, Jones, ETN, all guys he's competing with for targets. His target share is not there. It's not at a really high level. The receiving depth, the downfield plays, where we talked about not being at a high volume, and he's still competing with a guy like Zay Jones over there in that area of the field as well. Then we talk about touchdowns. Calvin really does have a few touchdowns, but the competition for those touchdowns is there. Zay Jones has missed a couple of games, but he's still tied with Ridley in end zone targets so far this season. And we talk about Ridley's struggles here so far in fantasy and his production in fantasy football. The offense is not struggling, though. It's still a top 10 scoring offense on the season. So you shouldn't expect to see a significant change in the way this offense approaches the game, how they approach their scheme, if they make any changes and look to that downfield passing game a little bit more. Things are going well offensively for this Jaguars team, and really I think the competition is just the big factor here, and we're not seeing him dominate in the way I think a lot of people expected when they watched some of those, training camp highlights. So for Ridley, definitely a guy I'm still looking to try to salvage value from, because I do think that name still holds value amongst your leagues. But there's definitely players that I think you can look to that, hey, this guy dominates, downfield passing plays. Hey, this is a guy getting a ton of volume this season that can really be a sustainable week-to-week player because of that high floor. Or, hey, this guy is getting tons of end zone targets and he just hasn't produced yet, and I kind of want to play off of something like that. Maybe it's a DK Metcalf or what have you. Ridley's a player that I just don't see how things change from what they've been so far this season. Now we move to a couple of receivers dealing with quarterback injuries. I want to start with DeAndre Hopkins, who's already off to an awful start to the season. He's the wide receiver 42 right now. Tannehill suffers a high ankle sprain to that same ankle that he injured last season and had surgery on. The team is saying that he does not need another surgery, but high ankle sprain is one that is pretty concerning and could see Ryan Tannehill miss extended time. Now, the team does head into their bye week, so there is the chance that for Tannehill, he doesn't miss too many games for Hopkins. But if Malik Willis steps into the fold here, he's completely incapable of operating an offense in the passing game. Has been absolutely terrible in his career in the NFL. He's averaging 4.5 yards per attempt in 2022, 50.8% completion percentage. And here's something that is absolutely terrifying if you're a Titans fan. Last year, he had the highest average time to throw. He's hanging onto the football. He had 4 sacks on like 12 dropbacks last week against the Ravens. You cannot hang on to the football with this Titans offensive line. It's one of the worst in the NFL. It's not pass blocking well. And there's also a major problem in that exact situation with this offensive line for Tannehill, even if he's under center. He's arguably been the worst deep ball passer in the entire league, and that is something that DeAndre Hopkins sorely needs if he's going to produce for this offense, which I'll get to in a little bit. But Tannehill's numbers under downfield of 20 on passes of 20+ air yards, 8 for 29. That's a 27% completion percentage. 0 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. His passer rating is dead last, 33.6 this season. So for Hopkins, we're missing that downfield production. His target share is solid, 28.6%, definitely good. Problem is, it needs to be even higher than this. We need to see this in the 30s because this team is attempting just 27.5 passes per game, which is second last in the NFL. And what we don't have from Hopkins is touchdowns. And if you look at A.J. Brown, what he managed to do in like his really good seasons with the Titans, it was explosive plays and touchdowns. And right now, Hopkins isn't really getting a lot of either. He has 7 end zone targets, which is second in the NFL, but 0 touchdowns on the year. So he is a little bit unlucky, but even so, we have a guy like Derrick Henry taking away a lot of opportunities inside the 5 as this team looks to run the football to convert their touchdowns. So with this Tennessee team that is not throwing the ball often, has a quarterback that can't generate explosive plays, has a backup quarterback that can't operate an offense, I bet you this team will be running the ball on close to 55-60% of plays if Malik Willis is the guy at quarterback for the foreseeable future. And then, most importantly, being able to score touchdowns. This offense isn't scoring many points, 26th in points per game this season. Look, I am doing everything I can to get out from under DeAndre Hopkins before we get any later into this season while his name still holds value, because his fantasy production will not. I would expect him to be in this area of fantasy finish by the end of the year, a wide receiver 4. Is where he looks to be rest of season, and a very difficult asset to be able to start week in and week out. Let's get to our final player, a player you're probably not thinking about panicking on, but I certainly am. It's DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. He's the wide receiver 3 right now in fantasy points, or in half PPR fantasy points on the season, so the year's been great for him. Here's the situation, though. Justin Fields goes down with a thumb injury, a dislocated thumb, and the timetable seems really murky for Fields here. It's an injury where the team has mentioned it's about the swelling going down. It's about grip strength, being able to hold on to the football. Is this going to be a problem for Fields for an extended period? A thumb injury on the throwing hand really seems to me like a big problem, especially in the passing game. And then we have an undrafted rookie out of Shepherd University in Tyson Bagent stepping in to relieve Justin Fields and potentially being the starter moving forward. We'll see if that's the case. Maybe they go to free agency, or maybe they look more than likely free agency, because, again, we're looking at P.J. Walker was the original guy that stepped in and was going to be the backup in the preseason. They let him go in favor of Bagent. So I think what we will likely see from the Bears in Fields' absence, and what we saw last season, is a heavy dose of the run game. we saw in this game when Fields went out and Badgett came in, the Bears were running the ball on 58% of plays. So they clearly made a diversion to, hey, let's take care of the football. We'll run the ball behind this offensive line and utilize our backs as opposed to leaning on a quarterback that we really can't trust or really know what we have. Last season, this was a Chicago team that ran the ball at the highest rate in the NFL, 56.2% of plays. And this was a season last year where Fields did miss some time. So this is something we already have, information on from last season with probably a better quarterback as well with Andy Dalton. Moore is also, you look at the fantasy finish so far this season, and I think it is, just blatantly telling you the wrong story. 43% of Moore's production this year in fantasy football came in that one game against the Washington Commanders. Broke a couple explosive plays and obviously found the end zone a bunch of times. So from a week-to-week basis, like Moore wasn't a fantastic asset, but he probably single-handedly won you a fantasy week in that 1 week, week 5 against Washington. So I was like, okay, well, let's see what the rest of the year likes. Maybe Fields only misses 1 or 2 games, and then they can get back on track, and we can kind of go off of what we've seen the last few weeks, which is an uptick in targets. So the next 2 weeks, the Raiders and the Chargers, those are definitely positive matchups, but I also think those are matchups that Justin Fields will be missing for, which is a major problem. And then I looked at what's left, and it is terrifying for fantasy football. So we have the Saints, Panthers, Lions, Vikings, Lions, Browns. The Lions, the Vikings are not a great pass defense, but their blitz rate has and what they can do generating pressure because of that gives Justin Fields a lot of problems, and it has in his career. So I'm concerned about that game, even though it's not as intimidating on paper. But then we have the rest of these teams. 5 of these 6 games I'm talking about are against teams that are top 10 in defense against the pass this season. The Browns in specific is week 1 of the fantasy playoffs. So DJ Moore's going to be a tough start against the Browns to start your fantasy postseason. And it could be a player that if you don't look to get out from Moore could be the reason that you're not playing in the semifinal matchup of your fantasy playoffs. So schedule is something you got to start taking into account. We have some good data now on all of these teams. I'm concerned about this injury to Fields, and this is, to me, a perfect time to take what is, with right now with Fields is a murky situation where people might think he might not miss any time. I'm of the belief he'll miss at least a few games. So perfect time to get out from under Moore as a player I'm really worried about. All right, those are 5 players I believe it's time to panic about this week in fantasy football. If you guys have any other players you're concerned about or any players you want to hear from me on, definitely drop those down below in the comments, or any trades you're looking to make to get rid of these guys. Happy to, kind of give you an idea of what you can expect to get, or if a deal is good. Definitely drop those down below in the comments. Happy to answer those there. Like today's video as well if you enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.